Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, offseason vibe check. Portal party, bowl bummer, leaves us riding high.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs better with FanDuel, and new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you once again, and our minds on the football program today as we are kind of sitting here during a portion of the offseason that has developed a lot differently than I know I anticipated. I don't know about your expectations for what we'd see coming out of the gates, but tying together what we saw last year, projecting now into 2025, and doing that on the heels of a bowl game that didn't go the way you wanted it to. I was curious to kind of get a gauge of where you are, and certainly want to hear from those out there across the Locked On Texas Tech galaxy, how you're feeling as a Red Raider fan, because we've kind of had this feeling over the last few years where you end on a high note, you get that win in a bowl game, Chris, and you carry that momentum into the offseason. So you were without that this year, and then boom, all of a sudden there's a portal party that, I don't know, maybe for some kind of had you forgetting almost about what's going on with the bowl game. But it's been an interesting ride, and we're just a few weeks into it, my friend.
Yes. Yeah, we do talk up the fact that you do feel like you get a bit of a jolt after a bowl win, kind of heading into the spring semester, and you don't have that now. But I'm not. Look, did I want to win the bowl game and win the Liberty Bowl and beat Arkansas? 1,000%. Could it be used as a positive? Certainly, because there'll be some expectations on this football team that we know. But I think in early December when all this is happening, it's like I think people were kind of daring to dream, and it's like you're fast forwarding through a lot. And I'm not so certain that as you look back on it, the fact that you lost, it's not going to help you a bit, because I think that, and maybe this is my emotions, and you'll know where I'm going with this, but I think Texas Tech a lot of the times is better under the radar or chip on the shoulder or being slept on, and that's typically when you do your best, as opposed to like everybody loves you in the off season. You're just the you're at the top of all the lists out there and everything like that, as we have recent memory from that from a couple years ago. But this, I think you're about to embark on maybe the most important spring in your program history, certainly in recent memory, because of these 18, potentially plus new pieces and some expectations, and and there's a bit of a sense of urgency you get, understand. I think that your pot is committed when it comes to the NIL, okay? And you certainly put your best foot forward with what you added, and all these, you're going to have a handful of early enrollees from the high school class and all that, but all these 18-ish new players are going to be around in the spring, and you're coming off of a loss. So I don't know, tough question to answer, but that's kind of the way I would view it, I guess.
It's strange because the expectations would be much different if you had just had a typical kind of portal experience, I think, as it relates to 2025. And that probably has as much impact on how you're feeling about the offseason as anything, Chris. Is there hope on the horizon? Or do we feel like if you were disappointed by 24 or the finish to it, do you feel like there's going to be more of the same? But there's just no way to get around the fact that you can now, in a fairly short period of time, particularly given what we have once come from, you can now give your roster a makeover. You can have a glow up. as soon as you get into the offseason almost, Chris. And I say that right now, it's still just on paper. You've won no games yet with these guys. So you obviously got to take the second step and actually go do it in the fall. But I told you this during the portal window initially opening in those first few days. I'm into it. I think some are denying or ignoring this guilty pleasure known as the transfer portal. But as a fan, I'm into it. And certainly this particular one was a lot of fun as a Red Raider fan. But I really just mean in general, from year to year as a college football fan, there's a little more spice added to it. I know they tell us that some things are going to impact it, and maybe some of that spice will be taken out as we get into this new revenue sharing era. I don't know if I buy all that, though.
I'm with you. There's some articles and some people quoted in recent weeks saying it's almost as if even the blue bloods of the sport are saying we support a lot of these guardrails. I guess that's my term for a lot of what's about to go on. But then there's lawyers that are saying this is unconstitutional. You can't. I don't care what you say you're trying to do. If somebody wants to go pay somebody, whatever, and I've seen, because what we're talking about is, okay, you've got the revenue sharing and all those things that is about to happen. It's the House case is not official yet. Okay, this is just what everybody's operating under, with the assumption that it's going to be made official. But then once you start operating with those rules, they will allow NIL with fair market value, and it's got to be run through this clearinghouse, which is not associated with NCAA. And there's lawyers that are saying, okay, well, what is fair market value if you're in New York City versus if you're in Lubbock, Texas, or you're in Provo, Utah? Like what, and how can you basically decide what it's worth to somebody that owns a business that wants to do this or that? And I think that's going to be pushed and probably litigated and all those things. So but that we can talk about that as we go along here. But the Red Raiders obviously are operating under the assumption that this is kind of a not a one-shot deal, but this is the rules right now. We're going to try to take advantage of them, and other schools have as well. But yeah, it's an exciting time, but I like my team with an edge. And it's hard to base these bowl games and everything like that. While we want to win, you obviously Arkansas didn't either, but you just did not have it wasn't your team. And yes, they wore the double T on the side of their helmet, and all these guys played for Texas Tech, some of which were already committed to other programs. But I think Arizona State's probably going to be picked to win this Big 12 next year. They've got 17 or 18 starters, and Cam Scatterboo is going to be impossible to replace. But it'll be interesting to see kind of where Texas Tech will kind of fall under the expectations, and as you start to see early top 25s roll out and all those things. But it's interesting times for sure.
Well, I think, and that's a terrific segue. That's why you're a professional. I think those expectations not only tie into some very recent movement as far as the roster glow up, to use the industry term, but also, Chris, the general nature of the program now in this new context of the Big 12 Conference. And this is part of what I mean as an example. You may or may not have seen from CNBC, I believe, a recent ranking of, I think they did the top 75 athletics programs on various campuses across the country and how they rank monetarily. No surprise, some of your neighbors to the south in the top three, Ohio State, Longhorns, Aggies right there making up the top three. But from the Texas Tech perspective of this new era of the Big 12, especially, Chris, I think there's been this sort of underlying theme as you left the old Big 12, transitioned into the new one, is that now all of a sudden within your conference context, you were no longer going to be in that have not kind of category. You weren't going to be the team that was punching up all the time or was the plucky underdog. At least your resources would indicate you shouldn't have that kind of expectation. But that is a different reality than has been there always for Texas Tech whenever you are conference neighbors with some of the richest pricks on the block. So I don't know. I don't know exactly as a fan how to deal kind of with that transition and then what you expect year to year in conference, because it is sort of a new reality just again within that conference context. By the way, number one in the Big 12 according to this list, still number 33 nationally. So that's why I got to say, within this conference context, I'm not trying to act like you are among the creme de la creme financially nationally. But Chris, number one in the Big 12 conference, and you combine that with what we've seen happen with this roster this off season. It's kind of a long time coming, but it all seems to be combining to add up to a, like you said, most important spring we've ever seen or have seen in quite some time, and a fall coming up around the corner that will, I think, justifiably so include some expectations as high as they have been in a really long time. First, today's episode brought to you by Rocket Money. And if you're lost in the subscription whirlwind, listen up. If you're like me, you've had a few subscriptions you didn't even realize you were still paying on. And that's where Rocket Money comes in, making it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and even helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit in 2025. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, the subscription tracker is a must-have. Cancel services you're not using anymore and save a ton. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Just go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
Yeah, I saw this. I saw this ranking. It reminds me of like every time we see Forbes or some of those financial, I guess magazines or outlets or whatever. When they kind of put a number on like what the most valuable professional franchises are worth, and obviously you and I are Cowboy fans, and they're always worth like the most of anybody. And what does that mean exactly? Is that they're not selling the Cowboys? I don't know if they would get what they say it's worth. If they did, maybe they would. But it's not like you're selling your athletic department. It's a value, and I think it's interesting because there's a lot that went into it. It's an inexact figure, but when you're ranked number one, you're going to tout it. And I say number one is in the Big 12. I do think if you get into that private equity conversation, I do think that's where some of these numbers and values certainly come into play. They potentially come into play as it relates to rights fees and some of the things that are on the horizon in the coming years. And they value it based on a variety of things. And yeah, it's nice to be tops in your neighborhood, anyways. And it basically that article, it indicates that the ACC is worth more than the Big 12 and all those things too. So it's worth mentioning that as well. But I think you're like worth 150 or so million dollars more than the average Big 12 program, if I read it correctly. You're generating close to 150 million dollars of revenue. I think you've been a self-sustaining athletic program. You certainly have a lot of donors, a lot of which have stepped up recently, and we know those names of Cody Campbell and John Sellers, and obviously Dusty Womble and Gary Peterson, and Tim Culp's name is mentioned, Mark McDougal, all those guys is what Joey mentioned in one of those recent press gatherings. But and I think your structure that you put in place, because I don't know how this factors into it. It's just, and I've said this recently too, but as I go around the league, I just don't think people realize how nice your stuff is. It's just hard to impress upon people like how good your arena or football stadium and what's around it. Certainly now that you've finished up the South End Zone project compared to like I'll just speak to where I just came from in BYU and Utah. I mean, it's not even close. And I guess that's worth something. I don't know how much of that part factors into things like this, but it does allow you to generate more revenue, I think, with because I mean, some of these arenas, for example, there's no suites in them. They don't exist. And you've got premium seating at a lot of these places, which that's what your market has asked for, and I think that's what allows you to generate more revenue off of your football program, which is where most of this money's coming from. And as long as your stadium is full when you're playing, that's what makes the money, and that's why it's so important for you to be chips in the middle of the table as it relates to your football program and generating excitement and all those things. That's why these 18 new pieces that you've added via the portal, it's kind of there's a direct correlation into that, and you being ranked number one in value, I think. So I think Texas Tech would like to stay there, and we shall see. But I don't, again, at the end of the day, I wish they were handing out trophies for that, but it's not really worth anything, and it's not like you're selling your program or anything.
Yeah, it does matter though. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
that's the reality of the situation. And you look at some of those at the top of the list, and you're seeing some of those consistently competing for the most interesting prizes from season to season. And this is really across all sports. Obviously, football is at the steering wheel of any athletics department. If you considered it to be a van, some are like a Volkswagen van, some maybe a Mercedes van or something like that. But football is what rows the boat, Chris. But really, I think you talk about increasing expectations across the board because of the state of what you are as an athletics department compared to clearly where you've been historically. You've come a long way in about 100 years, and you had a heck of a lot of catching up to do to the tune of a quarter century or a half a century with some of your neighbors we've already mentioned, not to mention, of course, the copious amounts of cash that have been involved elsewhere. But the gains that you've made have really been incredible to witness against a lot of long odds, and still feel like some of the best days are to come. And I'd love for one of those best days maybe to kick off, I don't know, somewhere around September 1st, August 30th. I'm not sure when the opening date is. But specifically, back to the football program, just to put a ribbon on the conversation, Chris, there's no way around the fact that within the context of the Big 12 conference, when you're talking about conference hardware, we've mentioned it before on this show. We mentioned it going into this last season. You feel like you've got to be in a window or era where expectations, at least, are going to say, if not now, will it ever come to pass that you're able to really kind of maintain yourself in that most competitive category? And this is just one example as to why I think a lot of Red Raider fans justifiably feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think that's you just want to get to Arlington, because you haven't ever been, and that's the stated goal. That's it's kind of, you're going to feel like you've fallen short again if you don't make it, and it's not. There's really no in between. It's either you made it or you didn't, and then obviously there's work to do if you make it to Arlington. So, um, I guess I was surprised that I don't know who I would have thought. I think what second in the Big 12 was Kansas. And I'm trying
Yep.
to, I don't know how I would think about like financial valuations for a lot of these institutions, but Texas Tech trying to do as much as they can with the resources involved and trying to push it forward, and not okay with just falling short of the Big 12 title game and going to Memphis for a bowl game. So and that's good. That's a positive. That there's no like, well, it was a good year. I mean, everybody, it's fun to win 8 games. It's better than losing 8. But I think you're ready to, like I said, like we said last year, graduate from this phase.
Yeah, no doubt. And just for curiosity's sake, it was Kansas, Texas Christian, Arizona, and Baylor that rounded out the top 5 within the Big 12 following Texas Tech. All right, Chris, before we get out of here, I've got to have some help with this one. Look, it may not be on everybody's radar, but you're telling me there's an addition to a basketball program, and he's going 7 feet, 6'11" and 3/4. But you're telling me there's an addition to a basketball program, and he's going 7 feet, 6'11" and 3/4. You got my attention. Mariel Akintok, I hope I'm somewhere in the neighborhood. Correct me where I'm going wrong, but a big man signing up to be a Red Raider. Tell us more about the name and what Tech is getting here.
Yeah, Mariella Kuntak. Yes.
Akuntak.
Yeah, he was on campus for your UCF loss. He had been on campus, I think, for a day or so prior, and really good visit. He had offers from a whole bunch of Big 12 schools, and what's interesting about him is that he will be on campus in a matter of days So he's up in Canada. There's a couple things that have factored into why he'll be on campus for you here pretty quick. Is that I think their season is already over or coming to an end. He's dinged up right now. He was going to be out for the next several weeks. And so I think everybody just was like, hey, let's just fast forward this deal. And I think you had a spot open to make that happen where he can, which would only help his development and he can get the right rehab and then be in your nutrition and strength program, all those things and see how it all works. It's just weird because it's like he's a high school kid basically on a visit, and then next thing you know, he's going to be on these road trips with me and be suiting up. And I don't know if he'll be allowed to go through warm ups and all the stuff, but yeah, you've added a big for next year, and he's a high school kid. Okay, so he's going to have 5 years to play for if that's the way the rule stays. And it's been fascinating because as you start to look ahead a bit, we've talked about the ability for Federico to be able to come back,
Yeah.
and you may now have your bigs set up for next year if Federico is able to come back and you want him back and he wants to come back and all those things. And you add a Kuntak and you've still got EY. I think you'll still go find somebody. You're not going to go find a JT Toppin, I don't think, but you may go try to find somebody that can play the four, and then but your roster, and I think you feel really good about the development of Christian Anderson as well. And you'll lose Chance McMillan. I think there's I don't know, a chance that you can get Darion Williams to come back. I think the NBA is going to have some interest there, but we'll see what happens there. But so Akuntak is somebody that, remember when Grant was coaching this summer in that the U.S. under 18 tournament that he went to go, and he was with
Yeah.
Tommy Lloyd and all those things.
Yep.
Yeah, Kuntak was on one of those teams, and so he's a high level player. And I don't think they ended up matching up, or maybe he sat out the game that they would have seen him, or was dinged up or something. I can't remember the dynamic there, but he's somebody that I think will be able to help you at some level as a true freshman. He's going to kind of need to. And he's not, I think he's probably a younger version of like what Federico is, but he's more advanced on the offensive end of the floor. I think that Federico is just now kind of figuring out how good he can be in these days, and he's been in college for many years. Also spent some time at junior college, which is why he would be allowed to come back. But I think that Kuntak is somebody that is a little more advanced in at this stage of his career, and he's got a lot of length. And I just big guys are hard to find, man. They just are.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like the offensive lineman, defensive lineman. There's only so many big people in the world, and the ones that are really good, everybody wants them. But so it's nice to kind of have that set potentially going into your your portal portion of the basketball coming up in April when the season ends, and you've got to try to put together your roster rather quickly. But if you can get Federico back and add him to a Kuntak and EY, you feel pretty good about your paint presence for next year.
Yeah, guys that you'll have some time to spend with, hopefully, if things
Hmm.
continue to proceed as you'd like for them year to year. And kind of feel like the windows have been few and far between with guys like that in some recent years for this program. I know you've had some additions as far as transfers go, and some of them have worked out really well for you. But I think about still, I'm not quite over. Maybe it's just some trauma, some historical Red Raider basketball trauma I need to get over. But I still think about some of those big guys that have walked out the door
Oh,
in their younger years and have gone on to be impactful elsewhere. So it's on my radar, maybe more prominently than it should be, possibly, Chris. But I kind of feel like this is a certain window where, like I said, you've got some long guys that maybe you can develop and sort of build a foundation within your program.
oh, Big Russ, Big Vlad. I'm trying to think of all the ones that have come through
Bacho and his
here.
cat.
Yep, Bacho, and they either spun up or spun down or went somewhere, the equivalent. And yeah, it's almost as if there was not enough patience shown, or you kind of are like, man, I don't know if this guy's a fit. But anyway, they were
Yeah.
fits elsewhere at times. But yeah, I do think this staff. I'm just going to base it off of what Christian Anderson is doing right now. I think this particular staff is really good at player development, and they're also going to throw some of these guys into the fire. And you have to trust your evaluations and all that. But I think that you take this player with the expectation that he factors in immediately at some level, and then he's got to look at it and say, okay, if Federico does come back, that's just a 1 year deal, and then the reins would be turned over to me, and you're still kind of developing EY, was a bit raw, and he's kind of a maybe with Federico and a guy like a Kuntak, he may be able to play more of a stretch position. You're not having to ask him to, be a post player per se, because he's got a great jumper and all that. But you're still in your infancy with him as a player. But it's crazy because he'll be a junior next year, just like that. But so we'll see, and then we'll see what else they look to add. But this is a player that I think that's a big time positive, that he'll be on campus in the spring semester and kind of be in practices and running up and down the roads with you, and kind of getting a feel for what this level is like.
Yeah, sort of feel like the clock is starting to tick on EY a little bit, and some of that has to do with the first portion of this season we've seen so far. I was hoping maybe for a little more impact for whatever reason, hadn't quite seen that, but these are premium spots, and obviously you need these kind of guys, these big men in the Big 12 conference, to be making an impact and not just collecting minutes and then collecting a water break. So I hope that you'll be able to get something out of this edition, and of course, like we're talking about here in big dream kind of terms, keep it all together. Keep developing and keep moving forward. It seems like such a big ask in this day and age within college sports, but that's the nature of the beast. So we'll deal with it and take it as it comes and as sometimes it goes. Chris, appreciate the time as always, man, and the insights. Enjoyed it as well. And we'll see you for the next round as we wrap up the week.
Keep hope alive, everybody.
And get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks so much for being out there, and thanks to the everydayers for always being out there. It's right there in the title, every day. And shout out to the Matador Mob. Enjoyed a spirited conversation. I don't know if I should divulge all the details. Just last night with the Matador Mobster, and we have come to a point of compromise. So shout out to my guy, Brent. And of course, if you're interested in becoming a Matador Mob insider, then you can hit the show notes and find the link there for a free 14-day trial. It's your direct line to Chris and myself with one-on-one text sent straight to your phone. All right, it was a grass-fed versus grain-fed beef conversation, and obviously I had the right answer, but you had the text to find out what the right answer was. Chris, thank you so much. We'll see you for the next round. We'll see all of you out there. Thank you as well for your time. For Chris, I'm Casey. We hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.